Welcome to Audio Storyhouse. This is a story of rebirth. In her past life, the apocalypse brought a frozen world. Anne was sold by her husband in exchange for food to feed himself and his mistress. Reborn before the freeze, Anne enjoys delicious food with her best friend, watching TV dramas. Meanwhile, her worthless ex-husband and his mistress hide in a room, starving. Frost-white moonlight streamed through the shattered window, casting its glow on the cramped and dark room. Anne watched Frank's figure from behind, as he conversed with a sleazy-looking bald man. The deal was swiftly concluded. Frank, with trembling hands, received a bag of food from the man, dry, hard bread, and a few pieces of moldy meat. He handed the food to his mistress, Ada, who looked on at Anne with a smug expression. Frank turned around, his eyes flickering with a complex light. He approached Anne, muttering, "Anne, I'm sorry, we had no choice." Anne was forcefully dragged away by the burly man, unable to comprehend why the man she loved so deeply could thrust her into such endless darkness. At the stranger's residence, Anne endured unspeakable torment. Filled with hatred and pain, Anne would never forget Frank and Ada, not even in her next life. When Anne woke up again, she found herself at home. Time had rewound to July 3rd, as if everything had been a dream, yet so real, recalling the year's weather changes. For some reason, there had been no rain since the onset of spring in February. By August, it was still clear skies, unbearably hot and dry, with everyone wondering when it would finally rain. On August 19th, the long-awaited rain came, and everyone reveled in the joy of the downpour. Little did they know, the rain would persist for over 10 days. By the end of August, the rain ceased, but the temperature plummeted, dropping from 37 degrees to a mere 6, forcing everyone to don their winter coats. Ada came to visit and never left, marking the onset of the Ice Age. After graduating from college and securing a job, Anne met Frank, who had been persistently pursuing her. Handsome, gentle, and considerate, Frank was everything Anne, an orphan who had never known warmth or love, could wish for. Having lost his mother early and left with a stepmother by his father, they shared a bond of mutual sympathy. Oddly enough, it was on this foundation of compassion and affection that Anne, somewhat bewilderingly, ended up marrying him. After marriage, Frank's stepsister Ada frequently visited, staying for days at a stretch. Despite no blood relation, the siblings shared a strong bond, which once sparked a hint of jealousy in Anne. Anne's close friend, Amy, had once cautioned her about the unusually close relationship between Frank and Ada, but Anne hadn't taken it to heart. Ada arrived on September 1st and, as the weather turned cold, decided to extend her stay. By September 6th, a blizzard had set in, and temperatures plummeted to -10 degrees. By September 15th, the mercury had dropped to -20 degrees. What followed need not be said. The government issued advisories to minimize outings and activities, leading to a frantic scramble for food and warm clothing, with everyone fearing starvation or freezing to death at home. With Ada appearing fragile and weak, Frank refused to let her venture out. So the two of them hoarded the scant supplies they had scavenged. Eventually, when water and power supplies ceased, Anne became their means of survival. It was then that Anne realized the harsh truth. She had been a fool, treating Ada like a sister and Frank with genuine affection, only to find out that the two had been in cahoots all along. Before any of this transpired, Anne resolved to stay with her best friend in this life. As Frank left for work, Anne, as always, tenderly handed him his clothes and said, "Honey, Amy called me yesterday. She's sick and alone. I'm thinking of staying with her for a couple of days." Frank glanced at Anne and smiled. "Amy is so lucky to have a sister like you. Go ahead, but take care of yourself too." He leaned in to kiss Anne, but she turned and dodged his kiss, opening the door to leave. Remembering the events of her past life made Anne feel sick to her stomach. Upon seeing Amy, without exchanging words, she embraced Anne and sobbed, "Anne, I thought I'd never see you again." Anne comforted her, patting her back, "Here I am with you, don't scare me. Tell me what's happened." After drying her tears and taking a few deep breaths, Amy spoke solemnly, "Anne, I know this will sound strange, but you must believe me. I had a dream that in 2 months, the temperature will plummet, and the world will be engulfed in blizzards. The snow carries a virus, and anyone who inhales it won't survive. Anne was shocked. Amy, I had the same dream. Amy was even more stunned. In my dream, you froze to death, with no food or hot water. Clutching Anne's hand, she looked at her urgently. And you, did you survive? Anne shook her head. I was sold to a man. I hate myself for being so blind to have married him. They comforted each other, cursing the despicable couple, finding solace in their shared outrage. Now, they had to plan how to survive the impending ice age. They needed to find a suitable shelter. After much thought, Amy decided to establish it in the mountains, in a large cave capable of storing supplies and withstanding potential post-storm floods. Amy smiled. Fortune favors us. Last week, my company had an outing at a farm located in the mountains. I stumbled upon a cave there that fits your description perfectly. It took them 2 hours to locate the cave. The mountain, 2,000 meters high, had several streams at its base, ensuring a convenient water supply. The cave, situated halfway up the mountain, was accessible by car, which would greatly facilitate the transportation of supplies. On their way back from the cave to Amy's house, Anne pondered over finances for refurbishing the cave, purchasing food, and acquiring warm clothing. Amy whispered conspiratorially, in my past life, I bought a lottery ticket. Anne replied, but you didn't win, or you would have shared with me. Amy interjected, wait, hear me out. I didn't win last time, but I remember the winning numbers. Anne burst into laughter. Fantastic. We're saved. Amy had purchased the ticket the day before, and sure enough, they 30 million won. The next day, they went to claim their prize fully equipped, the zeros in their account making them dizzy. With funds secured and a cave found, the next step was to refurbish the shelter. Anne contacted a well-reputed renovation company and took the owner to their cave, sharing their requirements. They planned to divide the cave into 6 areas according to their own design, each with its specific function: a kitchen, rooms, bathrooms, and 3 large storage areas. The floors were to be tiled, the walls built and tiled, and proper ventilation ensured at the top of the cave, with vents leading to the cliff balcony sealed securely. Most importantly, they wanted 2 impenetrable doors installed. Anne generously tipped the renovation company owner, who assured her of a job well done. Next, Anne contacted a solar panel manufacturer, ordering 10 panels and arranging for their installation within a few days. Amy prepared an extensive shopping list. Food: vacuum-packed rice, millet, flour, 1,000 kg each; noodles, green beans, soybeans, red beans, vermicelli, 500 kg each; and 1,000 packets of instant noodles in various flavors. Meat: pork, lamb, beef, chicken, 500 kg each, requiring 2 large freezers. Plus, 1,000 kg of cured meat and sausages for longer storage. Oil: 1,000 bottles of cooking oil, 500 seasoning items. Water: 300 bottles of 18.9L drinking water. They plan to buy 6 large water tanks and 10 buckets for water storage, considering the streams at the mountain base. Bedding: 20 sets of beddings, 20 down quilts, and 50 blankets, cushions, and towels. Clothing: 20 super thick down jackets, 10 military coats, 30 pairs of thick boots, 200 pairs of cotton socks, 20 pairs of gloves. Daily necessities: 1,000 toilet rolls, 100 toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, soap, 500 sanitary pads, and disinfectants. Heating: they bought 10 heaters and stocked up on coal and firewood. Tools: axes, hammers, saws, and other tools for daily use. Books and entertainment: a 500-volume library and a variety of board games for leisure. Anne and Amy were prepared for the storm. They had each other and were ready to face whatever came their way. Anne and Amy discussed their plans, deciding that Amy would handle food purchases while Anne would be responsible for clothing and bedding. 3 days swiftly passed, and Anne thought it best to return home and continue life as usual, to avoid raising Frank's suspicions. After more than half a month, on July 20th, Anne received a call from Amy, informing her that the cave renovations were complete and inviting her to come and take a look. Anne told Frank she'd be visiting Amy for a couple of days. Frank looked deeply into Anne's eyes, staying silent for a long time. Just as Anne began to worry he might suspect something, he smiled gently, hugged her, and said, "Okay, Anne, you seem a bit stressed lately, maybe from work. Go relax for a couple of days. When you return, we'll enjoy our life together. During the past half-month, Anne had consistently rejected Frank's advances, finding even lying beside him at night torturous. She found herself wishing for the catastrophic freeze to arrive sooner, to end her suffering with this despicable man. After meeting with Amy, Anne first inspected their stockpile, feeling a surge of security at the sight of the fully stocked warehouse. When they arrived at the cave in the afternoon, Anne was delighted to see it transformed from its previously dark state into a bright, warm, and welcoming space. It was time to buy furniture. Preferring not to order online, Anne decided to purchase directly from stores and quickly set everything up over the next couple of days. Amy spent a day buying 2 beds for the bedrooms, 8 wardrobes, tables and chairs, a sofa for the living room, dining table and chairs, cabinets, and some shelves for each room. They generously tipped the installation workers. Next, they arranged for an electrician to install 2 stoves, one large and one small, in the living room near the bedrooms, suitable for burning wood and charcoal. Anne positioned the water tanks she had bought, planning to fill them once they moved in, knowing the cold weather would preserve the water, ensuring enough supply for the 2 of them. 2 large freezers were placed in a corner of the living room. Amy brought out surveillance cameras she had purchased in advance, and Anne installed them outside the door and on the balcony to monitor the exterior. After setting everything up over 4 days, Anne received several calls from Frank, inquiring about her return. Anne made various excuses to postpone her return. Amy, infuriated, suggested, "Forget about that scumbag. According to you, just divorce him and hide until the Ice Age. Let's see what he can do then." Anne disagreed. "If I let him off that easily, wouldn't the suffering of my past life be in vain?" With their shelter ready, they began their second round of major shopping. This time, they focused on entertainment items, planning to have everything delivered to Amy's house before transporting it to the cave. They intended to download an extensive collection of TV shows, movies, variety shows, documentaries, and fill up as much storage space as possible. They also planned to purchase 50 power banks with the highest capacity to ensure they had power, along with books, toys like Lego, puzzles, and building blocks. They knew they needed lighting in case of power outages, so they bought 1,000 candles, 50 lighters, 200 boxes of matches, 20 emergency lights with charging and battery options, and 20 flashlights. As they busily shopped and moved items, time flew by, and soon it was early August. Unexpectedly, it began to rain on August 4th, a light drizzle that seemed to come half a month earlier than anticipated. Anne called Amy to discuss this surprising change. They decided that Anne would tell Frank she had a 10-day business trip so they could move their supplies to the cave and purchase more wood and charcoal. Unwilling to face Frank, who had been restless these past nights, Anne sent him a message and drove to Amy's house. She waited for the rain to stop in the evening before moving some of the clothes from the warehouse to the cave, concerned that heavy rain might dampen them. After 4 trips transporting bedding and clothing, with daylight approaching, they rested briefly, knowing a challenging day awaited them. The next morning, they rented a large truck, loading it with drinking water, grains, oil, toilet paper, and other essentials, planning to transport everything to the cave under the cover of night when there were fewer people around. Anne and Amy coordinated their shopping efforts, with Amy handling the meat purchases from 5 different suppliers. After collecting and storing the meat in the cave, they rested for an afternoon. As the rain intensified, Anne and Amy braved the downpour to transport all the grains and other essentials to the cave, leaving just enough space for a walkway, knowing they'd have plenty of time to organize later. The continuous rain lasted for 2 days, during which they ordered 2,000 kilograms each of wood and charcoal, to be delivered once the rain ceased. When the rain finally stopped on the 5th day, they received and arranged the massive delivery in the cave. On the 6th day, while Anne was shopping, she noticed a couple moving supplies, who seemed to take an interest in her. The woman approached Anne and discreetly asked if she too had the same dream, revealing that they too were reborn. They exchanged a few words of mutual understanding about the challenges of the impending apocalypse. After 9 busy days, Anne and Amy had transported all the supplies to the cave, now brimming with provisions. However, they realized they still needed to acquire medicines and weapons. Meanwhile, Frank had been incessantly calling Anne, who felt compelled to return home, leaving Amy to procure the remaining supplies. By August 15th, Anne was back home, just as torrential rain began, heralding the swift approach of the freezing temperatures. On August 25th, Frank informed Anne of Ada's impending visit, signaling the start of the icy apocalypse. In the days leading up to Ada's arrival, Anne discreetly installed several cameras around the house, linked to her phone, allowing her to monitor the situation from the safety of the shelter. She even took Ada on a lavish shopping spree, buying an abundance of groceries, snacks, and drinks. The next morning, Frank was at home resting when Anne mentioned her business trip for a week. He looked at her darkly, not uttering a word, but then he suddenly raised his hand. Before Anne could react, she was already on the ground, her face burning from the slap. Frank had hit her. His fists kept coming, hitting Anne repeatedly as she lay there, powerless to fight back, just huddling and crouching on the ground, protecting her head. Hearing the commotion, Ada hurriedly came out and pulled Frank away. He stood to the side, breathing heavily, while Ada tried to calm the situation with her words. Frank stepped forward, grabbed Anne's hair, and forced her to look into his eyes. "Anne, who do you think you are? Just an orphan. Anne gave you a home, and you don't appreciate it, even trying to deceive Anne. Last time you said you were going on a business trip, but you went to Amy's house instead. You think Anne doesn't know? There's a tracker in your car. You better not lie to me." He stormed into the bedroom, grabbed Anne's packed bag, threw it out the door, and then pushed Anne out as well. His final words were vicious. "You better behave yourself for Anne. Come back in a week or else consider yourself dead." With that, he slammed the door shut. Anne quickly grabbed her bag and hailed a taxi without any hesitation, immediately heading for Amy's house. It was a good thing that the last time Anne had to move stuff, she used Amy's car. Otherwise, she might have exposed the shelter, posing a significant threat to them. As soon as she entered Amy's house, she saw the clear imprint of a slap on Anne's face. Amy was furious and confronted her. "Did that jerk Frank hit you? Tell me, and I'll confront him. We need to call the police. We can't let him get away with this." Anne stopped Amy, who was about to storm out. "Amy, don't be rash. Grab your things and let's go. Don't waste time here. I'm afraid he might catch up." Anne drove Amy's car, taking several detours to ensure they weren't being followed. Then they hurried to the supermarket and headed straight to the food section. Without being picky, Anne grabbed everything edible: fruits, vegetables, snacks, meat, and pasta, filling up all the space in the car within 2 hours. After fueling up the car, they rushed to the shelter. Once the thick outer door of the shelter closed, Anne's highly strung nerves finally settled. She couldn't hold back anymore and broke down in tears in Amy's arms, cursing her own weakness for not being able to stand up to that maniac Frank. She hated herself for not having a better way to punish him and regretted ever marrying such a lunatic. After observing from the cave for a day and noticing no signs of being followed, they finally relaxed. The sky grew dark and gloomy, and a strong wind began to blow, swaying the trees violently. Despite it being only 2 p.m., it felt like nightfall. Anne realized a problem. "Amy, if it stays this dark and there's no sunlight, our solar panels won't be of any use." Amy led Anne to the living room where a yet-to-be-opened parcel lay. She proudly announced, "This is a treadmill generator. It's connected to a battery. Just half an hour of running each day can generate 5 kilowatts of electricity, enough for our lighting." The temperature in the room kept dropping. By the time they noticed, it had already reached -20 degrees Celsius inside, not to mention the outside temperature. Anne quickly lit the stove to warm up the room. They didn't use the stove every day, but they had enough wood and charcoal, though they tried to conserve as much as possible. After a busy day, Amy suggested they have hot pot for dinner, a heartwarming meal perfect for the cold season. After dinner, they realized that the water flow from the mountain was decreasing, likely freezing at the base. Fortunately, they had already stored enough water, so they weren't worried about the freeze. They spent the night listening to the howling wind outside, finding comfort in each other's company and sleeping soundly. The next morning, Anne woke up to the freezing cold. Despite having 3 blankets, the temperature had dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, likely -70 degrees Celsius outside. After dressing warmly, Anne opened the curtains to a world blanketed in black and white, a dark sky covered the earth, and continuous large snowflakes were visible to the naked eye. It was 7 a.m., still dark outside. Anne wondered how others were coping with this weather. Amy woke up and checked her phone. Anne, come and see. The neighborhood group chat is blowing up. Anne remembered that she had added Amy to the group for convenience. They sat together, browsing through the messages, all complaining about the weather. What kind of dreadful weather is this? It's freezing. How are we supposed to go outside? The pipes are frozen, there's no water. Is there any supermarket that can deliver some water? Can we still get deliveries? Anne turned on the mobile TV to see the news channel repeating the same message. Due to the blizzard conditions, all residents are advised to stay indoors. The temperature is extremely low, and visibility is even lower. Please take appropriate measures to keep warm. Most people could manage for a day or two at home, but the extended duration of the storm was unbearable. Remembering the cameras installed at her house, Anne logged into the system to check what Frank and Ada were up to. As expected, the two were comfortably sleeping together, enjoying the warmth of the air conditioning and blankets. Anne regretted not taking the blankets with her when she left. Amy, looking over Anne's shoulder, expressed her disgust at the couple. It's just shameful. They really have no shame, do they? During Ada's visit, Anne had only bought snacks, and the main food supplies at her house would soon run out. Anne was curious to see what Frank and Ada would do then. The blizzard continued for 2 days, with temperatures dropping and the sky remaining dark without any sign of the sun. Thankfully, the phone signals were still working, allowing Anne to stay updated with the outside world. Most news and videos were about the weather. Many people who ventured out for food never returned, leading to speculation about a toxic gas in the snow. While scientists researched the gas and potential preventions, Anne knew there was no antidote. The only solution was to wait for the blizzard to pass and the air to clear. The government issued a statement assuring residents of their ongoing efforts and urging everyone to stay indoors, not open windows, and protect themselves. The sudden disaster caught everyone off guard, with most households unprepared with enough food supplies. Fortunately, there was still electricity, allowing people to use their heaters and avoid freezing indoors. After 7 days of continuous storm, Anne checked the neighborhood group chat every day on Amy's phone. The discussions were mainly about the shortage of food. This is day whatever, who still has food? Anne will buy some. My neighbor went out 2 days ago to buy food and hasn't returned yet. It's so cold outside, and the snow is toxic. Once you go out, you can't come back. Anne watched Frank and Ada through the home surveillance. They were sitting on the sofa, wrapped in thick blankets, eating instant noodles and chatting comfortably. Anne anonymously posted a message in the neighborhood group chat, implying that Frank's family might have stocked up on food before the storm. The chat exploded with mentions of Frank, demanding explanations and a share of his food. Frank, watching the group chat, was visibly furious, likely leaving the group. He and Ada pushed the sofa against the door, fearing an intrusion. Shortly after Anne's message, people started knocking on Frank's door. He shouted back, claiming he had no food left and threatening them with a knife. The couple had a restless night. The next day was even worse, with frequent knocks on the door, including pleas and threats, testing their nerves. The situation escalated the following night. Desperate, a group of people forcefully broke into Frank's house. Frank and Ada, outnumbered and overpowered, were unable to defend themselves. The intruders beat up Frank and took all the food from his house. Among the group was a sleazy-looking bald man, whose eyes shone with malice as he eyed Ada. In her previous life, Frank had sold Anne to this very man. He reached out to drag Ada away, but she struggled fiercely, refusing to be taken. Despite her hatred for Ada, Anne couldn't help but feel uneasy, knowing all too well what it meant if Ada were to be taken away. Amy, sitting next to Anne, watched the monitor and tried to comfort her. Don't bother yourself with them. They brought this upon themselves. On the ground, beaten, Frank managed to get up and, from nowhere, pulled out a small knife. He lunged at the bald man, stabbing him in the arm. Enraged, the bald man picked up a stick and started beating Frank relentlessly. Thankfully, the group's leader intervened, stopping the bald man's assault. They pushed him out of the house and quickly left with the stolen food. Ada, in tears, dragged the injured Frank to the bed and tended to him. When Frank woke up and saw Ada still there, he seemed relieved. "Good, you're still here." Ada couldn't speak, just cried, holding Frank tightly. Anne watched this, her heart aching. This man, who had been a devil to her, was now risking his life for another woman. Ada soon asked Frank how he felt and if he was in pain anywhere. After a moment's thought, Frank, with a pained expression, said, my left leg. "I think it's broken. I can't move it." Anne turned off her phone, no longer interested in their fate. What mattered was that she was alive and well, enjoying delicious food and a warm bed. What could be better than that? Anne and Amy spent their days lounging on the sofa, wrapped in blankets, chatting, playing games, watching shows, snacking, and sipping coffee. Truly a divine life. After 2 days, Anne decided to check on Frank and Ada again. Their food was gone, and the little they had left had been taken by the intruders. Ada, while complaining about the lack of food, resolved to find a solution. Frank, lying in bed, suffering from the pain of his broken leg, hunger, and cold, looked pale and gaunt. "What can you do? Where will you find food?" he asked weakly. Ada, determined, said, "Leave it to me," and ventured out, all dressed up. Anne watched the surveillance until the next morning, but Ada never returned. Whether she found someone else to rely on or met a tragic fate remained unknown. Left alone with no food, water, or care, how long could Frank last? Anne closed the surveillance, no longer concerned about their fate. Surviving was her priority. As the snowstorm intensified and the temperature plummeted further, the internet finally collapsed. Cut off from the outside world and unaware of the depth of the snow outside their mountain cave, Anne and Amy were thankful for the abundance of books, downloaded shows, and games they had to pass the time. A month into the relentless blizzard, the snow finally stopped. The sky remained covered in fog, too thick to see through. Days passed uneventfully until April arrived. It had been half a month since the last snowfall, and the sun had started to appear, though the temperature remained low. One morning, to Anne's surprise, her phone picked up a weak signal. Every platform broadcasted the same message from the government: "Dear residents, the blizzard has only temporarily ceased. All surviving residents, please stay indoors, report your locations, and wait for helicopter-delivered relief supplies. Do not venture outside. Continue to wait for further instructions at home." Everyone believed that after the snowstorm, they would rebuild the city and restore civilized life together.